A destitute maid gave her last blanket to a freezing stranger, unaware he was the billionaire who owned the mansion she worked in. "You do not belong here," she hissed. The rain hammered down on the glass roof of the Blackwood estate like 1,000 desperate fists, a relentless and wild percussion against the sterile silence that had long ago consumed the mansion's heart. Lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating for a split second the cavernous, marble-floored ballroom where dust motes danced in the pale moonlight before darkness swallowed them whole once more. In this vast and hollow place, Alara felt smaller than she ever had, a ghost polishing the gilded memories of a life that was not her own. She was a ghost. Her worn, threadbare uniform felt paper-thin against the biting cold that seemed to seep from the very stones of the house, a cold that had nothing to do with the storm raging outside and everything to do with the profound, unspoken grief that was its sole occupant. Her hands, pale and trembling slightly from fatigue, moved in steady, practiced circles, wiping away the phantom fingerprints from a grand piano that no one ever played. The scent of lemon oil and old wood was the only perfume in the air, a stark contrast to the scent of rain-soaked earth that she yearned for. Her heart, a weary muscle, thudded a slow, lonely rhythm against her ribs. Each beat was a reminder of her son, Leo, sleeping soundly in their small, damp room in the staff quarters, his small chest rising and falling with a fragility that terrified her. He was all she had left. The master of the house, Mr. Alistair Blackwood, was as much a phantom as she was. In the 3 months she had worked here, she had seen him only as a fleeting shadow in a darkened window, a tall, gaunt silhouette against the amber hue of the library lamp late at night. The other staff spoke of him in hushed, reverent whispers, a man shattered by tragedy, a billionaire recluse who had locked himself away from the world after losing his wife and daughter in a terrible accident 2 years prior. They said the silence in the mansion was a shrine to their memory, a sacred vow of sorrow. Alara understood sorrow. It was a language she had become fluent in since her own beloved Michael was taken from her, leaving her with nothing but a locket, a mountain of debt, and their beautiful, fragile boy. She polished the ornate frames of portraits whose smiling faces seemed to mock the mansion's current state. They were gone. Tonight, the storm seemed to mirror the tempest in her own soul. The letter from Leo's doctor was tucked into the pocket of her apron, its crisp edges a constant, sharp reminder of her desperation. His condition required a new, expensive medication, a sum so far beyond her meager salary it might as well have been $1 million. The thought of it made her chest tighten, a familiar, biting cold of fear that was worse than any draft in the old house. She had been fired from her last job by Michael's mother, the cruel and elitist Mrs. Delacroix, who had blamed Alara's humble origins for her son's decision to choose love over the family fortune. She had called Alara a parasite, a stain, and had cast her out with nothing, ensuring no one in her circle would ever hire the girl who had ruined her son. This job, cleaning the silent halls of a broken man's home, was a lifeline she clung to with a desperate strength. She finished her work, the soft click of her worn shoes echoing in the cavernous halls as she made her way back to the small pocket of the estate she and Leo called home. Total silence. The wind howled, tearing at the ancient oaks that lined the long, winding driveway of the estate. Alara clutched her thin coat tighter, her head bowed against the relentless, pounding rain as she hurried along the gravel path toward the small stone cottage that housed the junior staff. It was a world away from the gleaming, polished marble of the main house, a place of worn linoleum and flickering lights, but it was hers. As she rounded a bend, a flash of lightning illuminated a figure slumped against the crumbling stone wall that bordered the woods. A man, soaked to the bone, his form a dark, unmoving heap against the pale stone. Her heart froze. For a moment, she hesitated, the warnings of the head housekeeper echoing in her mind about vagrants who sometimes sought shelter on the vast, poorly lit grounds. But another, stronger impulse, the gentle and unwavering voice of her own conscience, pushed her forward. His face was pale, his lips tinged with blue, and when she touched his forehead, it was burning with a feverish heat. He was not a vagrant. He was a man in desperate need. He was suffering. Looking at his haunted, gaunt face, She saw not a stranger, but a reflection of her own pain, another soul lost in the storm of life. She couldn't leave him. She made a decision. With strength she didn't know she possessed, she hoisted his arm over her shoulder. His dead weight a tremendous burden, and half-dragged, half-carried him the remaining distance to her small room, the biting cold of the rain soaking through her own clothes until she was as drenched as he was. Her world shrank to the singular, selfless task of saving this man. She had to. Inside her small, humble room, the world was a soft hush, a stark contrast to the raging storm outside. The space was tiny, dominated by a single bed she shared with Leo and a small table with two mismatched chairs. But it was clean, and a small, frayed rug on the floor gave it a touch of warmth. She gently laid the stranger on the rug, her mind racing. The spare blanket was thin and worn, barely enough for a summer night, let alone a man this chilled. Her eyes fell on the bed where Leo slept, cocooned in the one thick, warm blanket they owned, a patchwork quilt her own grandmother had made. It was Leo's comfort, his shield against the world. Without a second thought, she gently unwrapped her sleeping son, tucking the thin blanket tightly around him, and draped the precious, heavy quilt over the shivering stranger. The act was sacred, an unspoken sacrifice that cost her a piece of her own peace of mind. His teeth chattered, a brittle, rattling sound that splintered the quiet of the room. She knew she had to get something warm into him. On the small hot plate in the corner sat a pot with her own dinner, a simple vegetable soup she had been looking forward to all evening. It was all the food she had until her next paycheck. With steady hands, she heated the soup, the savory aroma filling the small space. She gently lifted the man's head, cradling it in her lap, and spooned the warm broth into his mouth. He was barely conscious, but he swallowed, his eyelids fluttering. A flicker of life. She used the last of the clean water to wipe the rain from his face with a soft cloth. His skin was rough with stubble, but underneath the grime and exhaustion, there was a kindness in the lines around his eyes, a deep sadness that she recognized instantly. It was the look of a man who had lost everything. Alistair Blackwood drifted in a fog of grief and fever. He had been walking for hours, driven from the suffocating silence of his mansion by the anniversary of the day his world had ended. He had wanted the storm to wash him away, to feel something, anything, other than the hollow ache that had been his constant companion for 2 long years. He remembered stumbling, the world tilting, the cold seeping into his bones. Then, nothing. Now sensations slowly returned, muffled and distant. A gentle touch on his forehead. The scent of simple, honest soup, a smell from a life he had never known. The impossible warmth of a heavy blanket that smelled of lavender and innocence. He cracked his eyes open a sliver, the flickering light of a single lamp making the room swim. He saw a woman, her face a pale, worried oval in the dimness, her movements gentle and sincere. He saw a small child sleeping peacefully in the bed. He saw a worn, wooden rattle on the nightstand, a symbol of a life so profoundly different from his own sterile existence. He felt a seismic shift inside his chest, a warmth spreading from the soup, from the blanket, a warmth that had nothing to do with temperature. It was kindness, pure, selfless, and utterly unexpected. He didn't know who she was, only that she was giving him her last vestiges of comfort without a single question. A sob caught in his throat, raw and unspoken. He was too weak to speak, to explain. He could only watch as this angel of the storm saved him. Before the fog reclaimed him, he saw her check on her child, her touch so tender it made his own shattered heart ache with an unbearable longing. She was pure. When Alara woke the next morning to the soft gray light of dawn, the man was gone. For a frantic moment, she thought she had dreamed it all. But the thick quilt was neatly folded at the foot of her bed, and the empty soup bowl was on the table. Beside it lay a single tarnished coin, an old piece of currency worth almost nothing. A wave of tenderness washed over her. It was likely all he had to give, a humble receipt for her kindness. She picked up the coin, its metal cool against her palm, and tucked it safely into the pocket of her apron. It was a reminder that even in the darkest of storms, humanity could still be a flickering light. She didn't know it yet, but this moment, this simple exchange would change everything. The consequences of her kindness arrived swiftly and cruelly. 2 days later, Leo's cough worsened, a dry, rattling sound that echoed the chattering of the stranger's teeth. The doctor's words from the week before came back to her, sharp and clinical. Without the new medication, his fragile lungs would struggle. The stretched dose of his current medicine, a result of her giving some to the feverish stranger, had been a gamble she had lost. Desperation, cold and sharp, clawed at her throat. She had to get the money. She begged the head housekeeper for an advance. But Mrs. Gable, a woman of rigid rules and little sympathy, refused her flatly. "We are not a charity, Alara," she had said, her voice crisp and final. The words echoed the same sentiment Mrs. Delacroix had spat at her years ago. It seemed the world was full of people who saw kindness as a weakness to be exploited, a currency they did not trade in. She felt a familiar, brittle despair begin to creep in, the heavy fog of hopelessness threatening to suffocate her quiet resolve. She was alone. Meanwhile, in the west wing of the mansion, Alistair Blackwood was a man reborn, or rather reawakened. The fever had broken, but the profound impact of the night in the storm had left an indelible mark on his soul. He had returned to his cavernous bedroom before dawn, his mind reeling. He had instructed his security chief, a discreet man named Arthur, to find out who lived in the small staff cottage at the edge of the woods. The report came back within the hour. Alara Vance, single mother, recently hired. A woman living in poverty on his own land. The same woman who had given him her child's blanket and her own dinner, expecting nothing in return. A wave of shame, so potent it made him gasp, washed over him. He, a man who could buy and sell entire countries, had been saved by the poorest person on his payroll. He looked at his reflection in the ornate, gilded mirror, and for the first time in 2 years, he saw not just a grieving widower, but a man who had become as cold and empty as the house he inhabited. That woman, with her quiet dignity and selfless heart, had shown him a truth he had long forgotten. That true wealth had nothing to do with the polished, gleaming assets in his portfolio, but with the capacity for human connection. His purpose, which had vanished with the light in his wife and daughter's eyes, suddenly became clear, sharp, and undeniable. He would not simply repay her. He would understand her. He would protect her. He would become her hidden savior. The first miracle arrived on a Tuesday. Alara returned from her shift to find a letter slipped under her door. It was from a prominent children's health foundation, informing her that an anonymous donor had established a fund to cover all of Leo's medical expenses for the next 5 years. The words blurred through her tears, the paper trembling in her hands. She sank to her knees, a sob of pure, cathartic relief escaping her lips. Felt impossible, a dream. She clutched the letter to her chest, whispering a prayer of thanks to a benefactor she would never know. She didn't see the sleek, black car parked in the shadows of the trees, or the man inside, Alistair, watching her small cottage with a tender, unwavering gaze. His own eyes glistening with an emotion he hadn't felt in years. Hope. The secret interventions continued. A week later, a large basket of fresh fruit, vegetables, and high-quality meat appeared on her doorstep with a note that read, "A small token of appreciation for our dedicated staff." Mrs. Gable was as surprised as anyone, but Alara felt a strange sense of a guardian angel watching over her. The persistent draft in her room, which made the nights so cold, vanished overnight. A repairman, hired by the estate, had fixed a crack in the window frame she hadn't even known was there. Small things, anonymous acts of grace that slowly began to stitch her frayed life back together. She started to smile again, a genuine, gentle smile that reached her tired eyes. Her laughter, when she played with a healthier, more energetic Leo, was a sound as precious and rare as a songbird in the sterile silence of the estate. From his window, Alistair watched these changes, his heart, once a hollow cavern of grief, slowly filling with a light he never thought he would see again. He was orchestrating her happiness from the shadows, finding a profound, quiet joy in being the source of her relief. He learned her routines, the way she hummed a soft lullaby while she worked, the way she would pause to look at the worn locket around her neck, her expression a mixture of love and sorrow. He felt an undeniable connection to this woman, a bond forged in a storm and solidified by his secret admiration of her pure heart. He had to know her. The day of Alera's birthday arrived without fanfare. It was just another day of quiet work and weary bones. She expected nothing, asked for nothing. That evening, in her small room, she created her own celebration. She had used a little of her food money to buy a single, small cupcake from the village bakery. She placed it on a saucer, stuck a lone candle in the frosting, and lit it. The flickering light cast a golden glow on her face, illuminating the silent tears that tracked down her cheeks. She wasn't crying from sadness, but from a deep, overwhelming sense of gratitude for the recent blessings in her life. She held up the small, framed photo of Michael, his handsome face smiling back at her, and whispered, "Happy birthday to me, my love. I wish you were here." She sang a quiet, trembling lullaby, the same one she sang to Leo, the same one her mother had sung to her. It was a song of love, loss, and enduring hope, a profound moment of dignified solitude. Alistair had been standing outside her door for 10 minutes, his hand raised to knock, his heart pounding in his chest like a drum. He had seen the single candle through the crack in the door, heard the soft, heartbreaking melody of her song. The scene of her celebrating alone, with such quiet grace, shattered the last of his carefully constructed walls. This woman, who had given so much and asked for so little, deserved more than a secret benefactor. She deserved a friend. He took a deep breath, the air feeling thick and heavy in his lungs, and knocked softly on the door. The singing stopped. The soft click of the door opening revealed Alera, her eyes wide with surprise, glistening from her unshed tears. He stood there, no longer a shadow, but a man, his own eyes raw with an unspoken emotion. The silence deepened. "May I join the celebration?" he asked, his voice rough with disuse. She stared at him, this enigmatic, haunted man who was her employer, the master of the silent mansion. He looked different up close, less like a phantom and more like a man carrying an unbearable weight. His eyes, a deep, stormy gray, held a vulnerability she had not expected. She saw in them the same flicker of deep sadness she had seen in the face of the stranger in the storm, a connection she couldn't explain. She simply nodded, stepping back to let him into her tiny, humble world. He entered the room, his tall frame seeming to fill the small space, yet he moved with a quiet reverence, as if entering a sacred place. He sat in the other mismatched chair at the small table, his gaze falling on the single cupcake with its flickering candle. A small, sad smile touched his lips. "My daughter Lily, she loved cupcakes," he said, his voice a low murmur. For her 5th birthday, she wanted a cake made entirely of them. Hundreds of tiny cakes, each with a different color frosting. The confession, so simple and unexpected, hung in the air between them. This was the first beat in the rhythm of their shared healing. Alera watched him, her own grief rising to meet his. She saw not the powerful billionaire, but a fellow traveler on the lonely road of loss. She pushed the saucer with the cupcake towards him. "Please," she whispered. He looked at her, his expression one of raw gratitude, and he took it. They shared the small cake, a silent communion in the soft, flickering light. He then began to speak, the words flowing out of him as if a dam had finally broken. He told her about his wife, Amelia, about her laughter that used to echo in the now silent halls. He spoke of Lily, of her love for chasing butterflies in the garden, of the small, hand-painted rattle she used to shake with glee. As he spoke, Alera's eyes fell upon the worn wooden rattle on her own nightstand, Leo's old toy. The coincidence was a sharp gasp of understanding. He wasn't just sharing a story, he was sharing his very soul. Alera listened with unwavering, steady eyes, offering him the profound gift of being truly seen. She didn't offer empty platitudes or clumsy words of comfort. Instead, when he finally fell silent, his story told, she simply stood, went to the small hot plate, and began to brew a pot of tea. The simple, domestic act was more comforting than any words could have been. It was an act of care, a gesture that said, I am here with you in your pain. As the aroma of chamomile filled the room, she found herself reciprocating, sharing her own tragedy. She told him about Michael, their whirlwind romance, their dreams of a small house with a garden for Leo to play in. She spoke of the suddenness of his death, the way the world had splintered into a million sharp pieces. She told him about Mrs. Delacroix's cruelty, about the desperation and fear that had become her constant companions. They sat for hours, two lonely souls in a small, warm room, forging a bond over their shared grief. The cavernous mansion outside, with all its wealth and sorrow, seemed a world away. When he finally stood to leave, he paused at the door and placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. The touch was not romantic, but one of profound human connection. Thank you, Alara, he said, his voice thick with emotion. You have made this house feel less empty. He was gone. In the days that followed, the atmosphere in the mansion began to change. The sterile silence was now punctuated by quiet conversations. Alistair began to emerge from the shadows, seeking Alara out, not as an employer to a maid, but as a friend. They would talk in the library, surrounded by thousands of books that held stories less compelling than their own. He learned about Leo's love for drawing dinosaurs, and she learned about his passion for astronomy, a hobby he had shared with his daughter. A fragile, tender hope began to bloom in the desolate landscape of their lives. Alistair felt a fierce, protective urge to give her the world, to erase all the hardship she had ever known. His annual charity gala, a massive event held at the estate, was approaching. On a whim, driven by a desire to see her shine, he invited her not as a member of the staff, but as his personal guest. He had a simple but elegant deep blue dress delivered to her room, along with a small, handwritten note. So the brightest star in the house can finally be seen. Alara's heart thudded wildly. The gesture was more than kindness. It was a promise of something more. With trembling hands, she accepted. The night of the gala, the Blackwood estate was transformed. The cavernous halls, once silent and shadowed, were now filled with the golden glow of 1,000 lights and the soft murmur of hundreds of voices. Gleaming chandeliers cast rainbows on the polished marble floors, and impeccably dressed guests drifted through the rooms like characters in a fairy tale. Alara felt like an imposter, a simple brown bird in a flock of peacocks. The blue dress fit her perfectly, but she clutched her small handbag with white knuckles, feeling desperately out of place. Alistair, looking commanding and handsome in a crisp tuxedo, found her near the French doors overlooking the garden. He smiled, a genuine warm smile that made his weary eyes light up. You look beautiful, Alara, he said, his voice a low, intimate murmur that was just for her. For a moment, standing beside him, she felt she belonged. That moment was shattered by a sharp, venomous voice. Well, I should have known I'd find the trash trying to sneak in through the back. Alara froze. She turned to see Mrs. Delacroix, her face a mask of cruel triumph, her ornate jewels glittering like chips of ice. She was the personification of elitism, a woman whose heart was as cold and hard as the diamonds around her neck. I am truly shocked, Alistair, she said, her voice carrying across the suddenly quiet room, that you would allow this creature into your home. This is Alara Vance, a conniving little gold digger who seduced my son and then was left with nothing when he wisely came to his senses before he died. Now she's clearly latched onto you. The public humiliation was a physical blow. The guests turned to stare, their eyes a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. Alara felt the blood drain from her face, her body trembling. She wanted to run, to disappear, but she met Mrs. Delacroix's hateful gaze with a quiet, unflinching dignity. She would not give this woman the satisfaction of seeing her break. You do not belong here, Mrs. Delacroix hissed, her voice dripping with poison. Security. Remove this woman at once. Just as two guards began to step forward, a calm, powerful voice cut through the tension. "They will do no such thing." Alistair stepped forward, positioning himself slightly in front of Alara, a protective shield. He was no longer the grieving recluse. He was a commanding presence, his quiet authority silencing the entire room. He fixed Mrs. Delacroix with a gaze so cold and intense that she visibly faltered. The salvation scene had begun. "Alara is not just a guest, Mrs. Delacroix," he announced, his voice echoing in the sudden, heavy silence. "She is my guest of honor, and you are mistaken about who does not belong in this house." He then turned to address the captivated audience, his voice ringing with a conviction that was undeniable. "You all see a maid," he began, his eyes sweeping over the crowd of wealthy patrons. "I see the woman who saved my life." A collective gasp rippled through the room. He proceeded to tell them everything. He told them of the storm, of his collapse from grief and fever, of waking up in a small, humble room. He described, in vivid detail, how Alara, a stranger, had taken him in. "This woman," he said, his voice cracking with emotion as he looked at Alara, "who has so little, gave me her only warm blanket, her own dinner, and the medicine she desperately needed for her sick child, all without asking for a single thing in return. She showed me a purity of heart, a selfless kindness, that I have not seen in anyone in this room. Not in a lifetime of galas and fundraisers." He then turned his steely gaze back to Mrs. Delacroix. "You call her trash? You, who live in a world of transactions and calculated charity. You are not fit to speak her name." The final blow was swift and devastating. "As of this moment," Alistair announced, his voice like the crack of a whip, "Blackwood Industries is severing all ties with Delacroix Holdings. I suggest you all do the same, unless you wish to be associated with a woman whose soul is as bankrupt as her character will soon be." The power dynamic was completely, seismically, reversed. Mrs. Delacroix stood there, her face pale and shattered, speechless for the first time in her life. Alistair gently took Alara's hand, his touch warm and steady. "Come," he said softly. "Let's leave these people to their shadows." He led her away, leaving behind a room of stunned silence and the complete social ruin of his antagonist. He took her to the library, the heart of the mansion, a quiet sanctuary filled with the scent of old leather and paper. The amber hue of the lamps cast a warm, golden glow over the room. Alara was still in a state of shock, her mind struggling to process the monumental events of the last hour. Alistair stood before the grand fireplace, the flames dancing in his eyes. He turned to her, his expression tender and serious. It was time for the final revelation. "There's more I have to tell you, Alara," he said, his voice gentle. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, tarnished object. He opened his palm, and there, lying in the center, was the old coin she had found on her table after the stranger had gone. Her breath caught in her throat, a sharp gasp. "It was you," she whispered, the realization dawning on her, a wave of disbelief and wonder washing over her. "The man in the storm. It was you all along." "Yes," he confirmed, his gaze unwavering. "I was lost, Alara, not just in the storm but in my own grief. I had given up on the world, on myself. And then you found me. You didn't see a billionaire. You saw a human being in pain, and you responded with a grace that I thought no longer existed." He closed the distance between them, taking her hands in his. They were trembling. "I've kept this coin with me every day since," he continued, his voice thick with emotion. "It's more valuable to me than my entire fortune. It's a sacred reminder that a single act of kindness can change a life. You didn't just save me from the cold, Alara. You reawakened my heart. You gave me a reason to live again, a purpose. You showed me how to feel." The air between them shimmered with unspoken feelings, with the cathartic release of all the secrets and sorrows they had shared. He looked into her glistening, hopeful eyes and made his final confession. "I have fallen in love with you, Alara Vance. Not because I feel I owe you something, but because your quiet strength, your selfless heart, and your unwavering dignity have healed me in a way I never thought possible." You and Leo have filled the silence in this house and in my soul. He paused, his heart pounding. Build a new life with me. Let me be a father to Leo. Let us build a new family from the ashes of our old ones. A single, perfect tear rolled down Alara's cheek. It was a tear not of sorrow, but of profound, overwhelming joy. Yes, she whispered, the word a promise. Yes, he leaned in and kissed her. A tender, sacred kiss that sealed their future and healed their pasts. They were home. 1 year later, the Blackwood estate was no longer a monument to grief. It was a home, alive with the sounds that had been absent for so long. The relentless hammering of rain had been replaced by the relentless hammering of a small boy's feet on the polished marble floors. The sterile silence had been filled with the sound of Leo's joyous laughter, a sound that echoed through the halls like the purest music. The heavy fog of sorrow had lifted, replaced by the golden glow of sunlight streaming through the now spotless windows. Alara, no longer a maid in a threadbare uniform, stood on the grand terrace, watching her son chase a butterfly across the sprawling, manicured lawn. She was the picture of serene happiness, her face radiant. She was now Alara Blackwood, and she ran a thriving charitable foundation, funded by Alistair, dedicated to helping single mothers who found themselves in the desperate situations she had once known. She had turned her suffering into a source of strength and salvation for others. Alistair came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. He was a changed man. The haunted, gaunt look was gone, replaced by the calm, steady light of a man who had found his peace. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching their son, a perfect, complete family. The ghosts of the past had finally been laid to rest, replaced by the vibrant, undeniable promise of the future. The mansion was no longer a house of shadows. It was a house of love. This story is a testament to the profound, transformative power of a single, selfless act. It serves as a universal fable, reminding us that in a world that often feels cold and transactional, the currency of kindness holds an immeasurable value. Alara's simple gesture of compassion, offered without expectation of reward, created a ripple that not only saved a man's life, but also healed 2 shattered souls and built a new world of love and hope from the wreckage of their shared sorrow. It teaches us that true wealth is not found in gleaming assets or ornate possessions, but in the unwavering strength of a pure heart. If this story touched your heart and reaffirmed your faith in the goodness of people, we hope you'll carry its message with you. In every person you meet, there is an unspoken story of hardship and hope. A small gesture, a kind word, a moment of selfless support can be the miracle that changes everything, the flickering light that guides someone through their darkest storm. For more soul-stirring tales of love, redemption, and the incredible power of the human spirit, please like, share, and subscribe to Soulful Love Tales. Your support allows us to continue bringing these inspiring and heartwarming stories to the world. We'll see you in the next one.